Hello and welcome to another episode of our Karak Chat podcast.
An FTI Consulting podcast when we're talking about different things with a woman from construction industry.
We are your hosts for today. I am Nisreen.
And I'm Kate.
Today we are very excited to have Sara with us. Sara Aranjo is a partner and a dispute leader in the Middle East and Africa in Morgan Lewis Law Firm. In today's episode, which we have titled Bridging Gaps and Building Solution, we'll be exploring the construction industry in the Middle East and drawing from our guest experience and our insight to the construction industry to highlight lesson learned.
Before we start diving into our conversation, I would like to put more spotlight on our amazing guest. Sara is an expert in arbitration and construction law, and she has extensive experience in working with different clients, among which government, semi-government, and corporate clients in such industries such as construction, energy sectors, telecommunication, and so on. And I decided to read you a couple of feedback from the clients, which was listed in GAR. Clients tell about Sara that she is one of the brightest arbitration lawyer who has constantly displayed razor-sharp intelligence along with outstanding strategic skills. And there is one more I would like to read. Sara has been commented in Who is Who Legal for her outstanding performance for her clients, having developed initiative and victorious strategies. It's impressive, Sara.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And yeah, very impressive resume, Sara. But I would like to add as well, beyond Sara Law Blackers, she regularly publishes articles and speak about international arbitration and dispute resolution. She is a faculty member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and an adjunct professor of law at the University of Paris. Welcome, Sara. Truly impressive career, and we are very happy to have you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm truly delighted to be with you today, Nisreen and Kate. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Sara, I would like to start the podcast with a question I will ask our guests most of the time. What got you in the law? Like, why you choose law as your career?
So I'll probably start off with also a very atypical answer, which is just a little bit of a background. I'm actually the first lawyer in my family. And so maybe I'll not give you an answer that I've been dreaming about becoming a lawyer since I was 5 or 6. But the truth of the matter is I was hoping to go into medical school. But I was actually not so good into science, even though I majored in high school in science. I was actually better off in everything relating to history, literature, philosophy, and the sort. And I remember at some point, after graduating from high school, wanting really to go into medical school. And I remember the reason behind that was I really wanted to make an impact. So I really wanted to help out and make an impact in the community. And I remember one day my father coming from a long day of business meetings, and he told me, I just met someone who runs a bank and, he has a degree in law. And, that could be interesting because with law, you can do anything.
Yeah, correct.
And, it was pretty much an open discussion. And I figured, why not? And it was a time as well that you could just apply and get into law school because the system was more of a selective ex post, meaning anyone could get in, but that there will be a big flush over after the first year. And, I enrolled and a passion developed, most likely because also how good and skilled my professors were at the time. And that really, truly ignited a passion in myself, which has led me now, some of you may know, I hold 3 master's degrees. And my journey into arbitration has been quite accidental as well. Meaning when I started off my career, I was a corporate attorney. And it was really the time before the 2008 financial crisis where if you wanted to go into law and do an international career in law, well, you had to be in sort of corporate private equity. That was really the boom of the market. And so I did that. And I did that for around 2-3 years approximately. And then I remember working as a very junior associate in London at a US firm. And I was literally the only person across the firm who spoke Arabic. So the firm had, around 500 lawyers, and I was literally the only one who spoke Arabic across the entire firm. And believe it or not, they had an arbitration, a big arbitration ongoing in one of the Arabic-speaking North African countries. And so it landed on my desk in terms of reading the documentation, assisting my colleagues. And I said to myself, that's really, interesting.
Yeah.
And it's really fun. And it's really very much active and adventurous because you're devising a strategy and then tailoring it for your client. And this is really how my passion for, I would say, arbitration started. And this is when I knew that, I often say I saw the light in a way. and then, when you work in such a field, the economy and the big drivers of the economy play a critical role into how you shape up as well your industry focus. And obviously, when I was practicing in Europe, I did some construction-related work, but it wasn't necessarily the bulk of my practice. But since moving to the UAE a little bit more than 10 years ago now, obviously construction, this is one of the dream places for, I guess, engineers, architects, experts, but also lawyers, whether at the front end or at the back litigious end. And so I've developed, obviously, also a passion for that in the sense that construction, really, when you look at it, it's one of the cornerstone industries of our life. And the beauty of it is that it also intersects with other different vital sectors, one of them being obviously energy. And this is, how it sort of all started, and it has grown since to becoming, a significant portion of my practice today.
And how do you find the construction industry itself, construction experience? Would you prefer to stay more in construction disputes or going back to commercial and so on?
I've been fortunate enough to navigate across what we usually call the three main sort of summa divisio or sub sort of categories of arbitration. On one of them is obviously commercial, meaning non-construction in a way, and then construction, and then the third aspect, which is investor state. So I've been quite fortunate to be able throughout my career to navigate, obviously, across different ratios and different percentages in terms of exposure, because the work fluctuates as well and the needs as well, to be able to navigate across those three areas. And this is something I still enjoy doing. The beauty of, I would say, arbitrating and being an arbitration lawyer and even sitting as an arbitrator in a region which is quite dynamic in terms of a construction infrastructure market is that there is really no limit. When you look at the projects, and often there's obviously maybe a joke that I can fill you in on, and our listeners on it, is that, when you go outside and you look at the amounts of cranes that are on there, as lawyers, we often think about the number of arbitrations that are out there. And so we often sort of discuss, there's this project, they're building now a school, they're building a museum, they're building a hospital complex, etc. So what is happening? And obviously they're building an airport and a mall extension and the sort. And so I say we are quite unfortunate to be in such a dynamic market in the UAE and also obviously Saudi Arabia and the broader region that we're in, because there's just so much happening and the projects are given, for the most part, extremely full-fledged, as we say, carte blanche, in terms of providing architects with a blanket imagination card to be able to go as beyond as they do sometimes. And we've seen certain projects which, defy maybe sometimes all logic, but which, are extremely complex to implement. And often, unfortunately, also part of it result in disputes. As a result of certain complexity, of course, comes as well certain hurdles in terms of managing as well the contractual relationship.
Yeah, that's really like, I think also part of me and Kate moving to Dubai was very similar. The state of the arts project in Dubai and everything going on is just, I think, the perfect environment for engineers, arbitrators, construction lawyers. But then, as we were discussing a little bit before our podcast, we would like to know why you moved to Dubai, because you have a lot of quiet and long journey between different countries. So we'd like to hear why you choose Dubai or Middle East just to settle.
And I get that question a lot, and so it's interesting. I mean, I was born in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and I've as you've rightfully said, Nisreen, I did move a lot. So I have lived, and I've been fortunate enough to do that in different countries such as Saudi, Egypt, France, the UK, the US, and obviously a big portion of my childhood was in Lebanon. But around 11 years ago, my husband got offered an opportunity in the UAE, and it was quite of a surprise because my husband does not come from the Middle East region, and I would have never thought that at some point I would come back to the region because of a reason, caused by him, as he had no original ties to the region. But the story is that around 11 years ago, he got a call. He got an opportunity in the UAE, and we decided that it was such a dynamic region, and that we wish to relocate from France and move here.
Yeah, I think that's similar to my experience as well, because my husband actually, who's also not from Arabic origin, wanted and decided to move to Dubai. So we came last year on holiday to Dubai, and he just like fell in love with Dubai, with the dynamic and everything going on. And he said, right, we need to move to Dubai. And now it's been 1 year, and it's been really good experience for me.
Well, I'm glad to hear, yeah.
I'm here for 10 years, and I can see a lot of changes in Dubai, and construction industry is very fascinating here. So like last decade here, it's really a pleasure, and I'm see a lot of similarity with what you say in terms of exciting construction moments and so on. But I would like to dive in more in our conversation and ask you more about your contribution in the past 10 years, because I followed you on different events for young arbitrators and so on, different forums, and I can see how much support and mentoring you provide for younger females in arbitration and in the law industry. Can you just put us, or give us more feedback on what you do to support female, empower females in arbitration and maybe construction industry?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for flagging that. I don't think particularly of myself as being at the forefront of mentorship, even though I try to carve out time out of often a busy schedule to do it, because I feel it's important. And I feel that at some point we were all young, and we were all at a junior level, and we were all also in a way trying to figure out what we really want to do and how we want to do it and with whom we want to do it and what are our value drivers. So I try as much as possible to give time to have what I'd like to call non-work related discussions, right? So there is always the aspect when you're talking about cases, files, your skill set, your technical skills, what have you learned, where did you graduate from? But I think what we often forgo and is not taught in law school is obviously the soft skills aspect which comes with it. It is obviously a very competitive profession. Arbitration as a practice in the area of law has been, over the past few years, one of the most popular areas. When you talk now to students in law school, a lot of them would like to venture out and try arbitration, even though they may not necessarily know what it entails. And I have a lot of those discussions. And then maybe after a little bit of time, they tell me that probably it's not necessarily appropriate, or they would like to perhaps have an internship or an experience to try it out. And so I think building a safe environment where you can have discussions and answer questions in a very natural, genuine, sincere manner about topics which do not often arise. Mm-hmm. So this is what I call in my category sort of, and I tell it to the lawyers that I have the pleasure of mentoring, I tell it to them as in the questions you never dare to ask, so you can ask them now. And equally, I think, more importantly, is to be able to, from a gender perspective, and, what I said earlier just applies globally across the board, whether you're a male or a female, but particularly as women, I've read the book. I don't know if some of you have, more likely seen it or came across it, the book called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. Yeah. And that book, I've read it many years ago, and it really, was an eye-opener for me, because even though it wasn't related to law, but more to business, it did really open my eyes with regards to some of the implicit, unconscious behaviors that women tend to have. And one of them is obviously the imposter syndrome that women tend to have. And so it is important that sometimes when we identify as a group, such as identifying with the same gender, with a group of people who are like-minded, etc., that it's important that at least there's a safe place to exchange ideas, but also more importantly, a safe place of support where people can mutually support each other. And I talk about that, more downward and upward as well. So it goes both ways. I'd like to think that when you talk about mentorship, it's a two-way street. Mm-hmm. So of course you can give to the younger members of the profession, but equally, there are a lot of increasing studies now on what we call reverse mentorship. And this is obviously upward type of mentorship and feedback. And we actually do it at my firm. We actually work both ways, both with the younger members, and then we invite the younger members to provide also feedback and an opportunity to engage in reverse mentorship. And that is crucial because, developing as a practitioner, of course, you have to have the right technical skill set, the right level of knowledge, the right level of business development skills, and everything that goes with it. But I think first and foremost as well, there are additional soft skills which you are never really taught. Yeah, and as women, to get these out of yourself already feels awkward. And particularly if you're in a field such as construction, which is by default male-dominated, it's even more of a cumbersome venture. So what I've tried to do, and I was encouraged by women at the time who were more senior than me. Back in 2018, I was the first woman to be elected to the board of directors of Arbitral Women. So Arbitral Women is an NGO which was set up in Paris in 1995, and the objective was to bring together female practitioners. Whether lawyers, engineers, experts, you name it, who are active in the international dispute resolution space. And unfortunately, up until 2018, Arbitral Women never had a board member from the Middle East region. And so I was encouraged at the time by one of the co-founders to run for that election, which I've done. And I was, fortunate enough to be elected. And so that has really driven a broader movement in terms of encouraging fellow female practitioners to engage, to be able to get together. And I remember our very first events and closed meetings. We used to be maybe 5 or 10 attending those. And over the course of the month, I was extremely proud to have one of our last meetings where we had a standing room with almost 150 individuals, and both men and women. And I guess that's the beauty of our field, the beauty of diversity as a whole, whether it's gender or other types of diversity. And so I try as much as I can to also instill that in my team. And also, lead hopefully by example. And I would close off by saying 2 things. When you want to lead also by example, you want to ensure that on the cases where you're acting as counsel, you are able across the different, I would say, sets of the chain, also apply those values and instill those values. So for example, we try as much as possible when a client asks for arbitrator recommendations to at least have a woman as part of the candidates. Equally, when clients ask for an expert proposal, we also make sure to have female experts, because most of the time they are not given the opportunity, but also equally they are extremely bright. And I've had the privilege of working with many of them. And of course, you are also here. So, but that's the issue. And we can, we'll talk probably more about it in this podcast. But to do that on one hand is also, something I personally take on myself as a personal obligation.
I think that's will leads us nicely to the question I was thinking about as well. So, as you said, given the diversity in Middle East, how do you think diversity and inclusion might affect the arbitration panel, the choice of arbitration panel? And do you think they have some effect of the construction dispute outcomes as well?
So this is not quoting myself. Those are like studies, obviously, that were conducted, research. And, there's a very renowned researcher in that area, Dr. Ulla Cartwright, who has conducted several studies, mainly with respect to arbitration, on the impact of diversity. And, when you look at, for example, more or less, if we want to make a similarity or analogy with boards, corporate boards, when you're the same type of individual thinking the same way, that's not necessarily prone to discussion. And we all know that discussion more or less leads to typically better outcomes and better decision making. The arbitrator mandate is a mandate based and premised on a decision making process. And so the more diversity you have in terms of views, in terms of also approaches, let's be honest, women tend to, for the most part, also approach issues in a different manner. To give you maybe a very a small anecdote, this morning I had a client call me, and he said, "You're a woman and you think like a woman. I would like to run by you an offer that we received from the chairwoman of this company, so that you can decipher it." And so I think that richness in viewpoints can only be, conducive to a very positive impact and supporting that decision-making process on tribunals for sure. And I've seen it myself when I sit on tribunals, that it's only conducive for a better, more balanced, more nuanced, and more just, hopefully, outcome. And this is the purpose of it.
Very nice. I'd like to dive in more in arbitration part of our discussion, and especially knowing your extensive experience in different jurisdictions and within different institutions such as ICC, DIAC, and so on. what would you advise to your clients who are thinking to proceed with arbitration but looking for the best outcome from it?
So, what I always say is that the beauty of law, and particularly dispute resolution, is that there is no one size fits all, right? And so that means you have to be creative enough to cater for the best solution for your client. Now, that solution can depend on several factors. One of them could be timing, could be dynamics, and could be obviously, as a starter and as a primer, the subject matter of the dispute. What is really the dispute? And then you add to it some layers which relate obviously to the dynamics of the parties, the history of the relationship, because, luckily up until now, we are still humans dealing among each other. So you need to factor that in. And so there is not really a one-size-fits-all approach, but rather I take it on myself to ensure that obviously one of the degrees I cited earlier that I have, I actually been to business school in addition to my legal education. And so I was actually the only lawyer in a class of non-lawyers, basically, students of backgrounds in business and finance. And that has helped a lot to also understand the language and the dynamics and the spirit and the objective of different businesses across different sectors. Because ultimately, we are here to hopefully provide solutions and resolve problems in a manner which is, I'd like to always say, and I say that to the team, commercially viable, right? This is really the outcome. So I would not look at it at all from a one-size-fits approach, but rather on a case-by-case basis.
Such a good answer, Sara. Thank you a lot. But I want to ask you the next question. Looking in the future, we all know that construction is very heavy on the records, and in general, it's very extensive and hard to work with. And knowing the development in technologies, how do you think future of arbitration for construction dispute look like?
So actually, I'll tell you that that's an excellent question, because this is one of the most currently debated questions in the field. How do you ensure that arbitration continues to deliver as a mechanism for dispute resolution, but also by the same token is not increasingly deemed to be an expensive tool? And looking at it from that perspective, there has been several technological advancements in the field. And as you've rightfully said, Kate, construction arbitration proceedings tend to be extremely fact-intensive. And both from a document perspective in terms of the documentation that's out there for the purpose of preparing the claims and thereafter putting and bundling up the claims in a manner before a tribunal, and then the conduct of the proceedings, and typically the volume of documentary evidence that's involved. And I think, part of what I'd like to personally call arbitration's maintenance of its credibility as a dispute resolution tool is obviously how do you balance out those two considerations, both considerations and both pertaining to the interests of justice, but also time considerations, but also costs. And of course, one can argue that time and costs are part of the same token, but flipped backwards. And so I think that the rise of certain technological advances we've seen over the past few years, the use, for example, of drones to conduct site visits. I mean, if you can just imagine in the past, you would have to fly over X number of individuals among tribunals, counsel, individuals on the site, potentially witnesses, potentially other types of stakeholders, and then the logistics around it and of course the associated costs with it. That can be all under certain circumstances depleted by the recourse, for example, to a drone visiting the site. And that has been increasingly used over the past few years. And I would say more recently, and I guess in a much more timely manner, the growing use of generative AI and the tools that have been put in place. Some of them are still at a beta status, others have been officially rolled out. Those tools, and I have tested some of them personally, are quite impressive and are quite impressive in terms of also ensuring that on one hand, the consideration of time is accelerated and then bringing also issues of cost. So I think that the future remains bright.
It's good news.
And it is bright in a sense that technology is going to drive and spur further a much more positive upward trend for the development of the practice.
Thank you, Sarah.
I think that as well leads me to another question. Because given, Sarah, your extensive experience working in different jurisdictions, have you noticed the implementation of these technical tools in the different regional arbitration center? And like, was it like in ICC they used more technical tools and DIAC or vice versa or other regional centers?
So what's interesting, obviously, about the field is the global international footprint. And obviously, you have the ICC as one of the leading arbitral institutions, and many of our listeners today would be alive to the ICC Commission on Arbitration and ADR, which is pretty much the think tank body of the ICC, and which has been quite instrumental in driving and shaping the way arbitration has been revamping itself and developing itself as a tool to adapt over the course of the number of years. And the tools such as, for example, emergency arbitrator, that was launched back in 2015. And we can see now that other institutions, including DIAC, for example, implementing this in the recent amendment to their rules. So there is definitely much more impetus to try and develop. And the development means as well integrating new technological advances, such as the use of the generative AI. And that means ultimately, currently there are many talks, whether at institutional levels, but also at a non-institutional level among bodies such as the IBA and other similar types of professional bodies, about whether or not there needs to be some form of regulation of the use of AI within the field of international arbitration. And if so, how do you regulate it as counsel versus how do you regulate it for experts, and how do you regulate it for arbitrators? And I think this is definitely a topic that's going to be trending over the coming months. And so I would say watch the space.
Yeah.
It's absolutely. I already came for so many articles around the subject, so it's definitely on the top of agenda for many people. But I would like to come back to your mentoring and empowering experience. I know that you give a lot of lectures and taking part in a lot of forums for young arbitrators. What advice can you give for someone who would like to start their career in construction segment?
So I would say that it's a very demanding field, right? And it is rightly so, because I was talking with a friend and we were discussing how analytical skills of lawyers tend to be different from those of engineers. And we came to the conclusion that, of course, you want to have at least an engineer, which is very, we call it in French, raisonnement cartésien, meaning Cartesian, sort of you want to, you know, have 1 + 1 tie up to 2, nothing more, nothing less. And that makes sense because obviously you don't want a building which is off spot or not necessarily constructed in a solid manner. So, you know, the scientific aspect of it means that you have to have rigor. And so that means as well that whether you're venturing out in the construction industry, whether as an engineer or whether as a lawyer or whether in any other capacity, you need to have that rigor. Ultimately, luckily, we don't hear about building collapsing here and there or incidents. Luckily, that remains a small portion. And I hope that will still, of course, be the case globally. But I think rigor, to have the rigor. And particularly when we're looking at the legal profession, it is obviously a very demanding profession at the outset. And when you talk about construction, you're talking about front end, meaning all the advisory that goes into it, the contractual documents. But also when you talk about disputes as well, it's a different dynamic as well, and you would have to have a different skill set. But I would say really passion is key because, you know, it's going to sound a little bit cliche, but if you like what you do, you're going to be hopefully good at it. And hopefully you're not going to notice the number of hours that you spend because I'm sure we all work very hard. So I would say be passionate about it, be dedicated and diligent, and have that rigor. And maybe I would add to maybe I would extend your question, Kate, for women maybe, and say that particularly in what tends to be a male-dominated field, believe in yourself and have the right level of confidence, because most of the time, unfortunately, this is what's acting as an inhibiting factor for future development.
I think that's kind of answer my second question, but I'll see if you have something else to add, which we covered a little bit of it. What advice you will give a female lawyer or expert who would like to establish themselves and establish their credibility in the arbitration?
So I think when we look at this question, you have two main issues, right? In the past, over 10, 15 years ago, the issue was that we didn't have an enough pool of competent women practitioners, whether at the expert level or whether at the counsel or arbitrator level. And that goes a little bit into the essence and philosophy as to why arbitral women back in 1995 thought that there was a need to create such a group. Luckily, now looking at it, the pool issue seems to have been resolved. And even in the Middle East region, because obviously, there has been, a silver lining in the development as well in terms of pool, both locally, but also for talented individuals like yourselves moving and bringing the skill set from abroad to here. So the question of pool is no longer a staggering question. The question now more is, if you're competent and you have a specific skill set and there's a need for it, well, how do you get also the visibility? So it's more now also a question of visibility, which also being a little bit honest with it, women tend to be less comfortable with it. So I would think that part of it is joining groups of female practitioners, but also non-female practitioners, because I always say, advocating for women, for example, does not mean that you're excluding men. And it does not work that way because we are all colleagues, we are all practitioners in the same field, and we all need each other. And actually, being very transparent, one of the best supports I have gotten in my career was from male colleagues.
Yeah.
And so it is a mutually, I'd like to call it a symbiotic relationship. And equally, I am a strong believer that a woman should not get the easy way just because she's a woman, but that because she's skilled, and that there is nothing worth of telling a woman that she's only getting an appointment or an engagement just because she's a woman. I think that's quite actually humiliating.
Yeah, I
To
think
the
that's
contrary, on an equal footing of skill set, if you have the opportunity to bring forward a woman who's skilled, then this is something that's absolutely required. And I try to do that. I sit on arbitration courts, and I'm asked to make appointments, and I'm presented with certain profiles. If I find that candidates are of a similar competent skill set and that both would be equally fit for the appointment, I would usually try to appoint the woman simply because she may have had less exposure and less visibility going forward. Of course, it remains on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I think it's just like giving the number of experts or arbitrators. It's just by number, there is more male arbitrators and male experts. I think sometimes that just maybe will lead to unconscious bias. That's
Absolutely.
guys, especially male, especially as experts, they are just more qualified in construction because this construction is just dominated, male-dominated industry. And I think, as you said, that's why important if the experience there and the qualification to give more opportunities to female.
I'm absolutely agree. But unfortunately, I need to say that we already almost finished our episode and getting to the end. And I want to say thank you, Sara, for such an amazing conversation. And we covered such beautiful fields like arbitration, powering women in construction. So yeah, it was a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you again to you, Kate, and to Nisreen and to FTI for having me. It was a pleasure to take part.
Yeah, thank you so much. As Kate said, it was really enjoyable conversation. And I think before we wrap up, I just want to see if you would like just to add anything to close our episode.
I would like to commend you on this important initiative, which I am sure will carry some impactful, positive inspirations to many, hopefully, of our colleagues, whether in the region and beyond, and hopefully across different levels of the seniority chains. And so thank you again, and grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for watching. We're looking forward to see you next time.